The conference room fell silent as the millionaire leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He looked at the young woman standing before the boardroom table and said those words that would change everything. "You know nothing about this." His laugh echoed off the glass walls, and every executive in the room seemed to hold their breath. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya had been preparing for this exact moment her entire life. And in the next 60 seconds, she would say something that would wipe that smile off his face forever. Before we continue with this incredible story, I want to invite you to subscribe to the Black Voices. We share stories like this one, stories about real human connection, courage, and kindness that remind us of the best in people. Hit that like button if you're already feeling this story, and drop a comment below about a time someone underestimated you. Now let's get back to Maya and what happened in that boardroom. Maya Washington had been working at Brightwell Technologies for exactly 11 months and 17 days. Not that she was counting, but when you're the youngest person in a company of 200 employees and one of only 3 black women in the entire building, you tend to mark time differently. Every morning she'd walk through those glass doors, past the receptionist who still sometimes forgot her name, and take the elevator to the 4th floor where the marketing department hummed with the quiet efficiency of people who had long ago stopped questioning the way things were. She'd grown up in a small apartment in Southside Chicago, the daughter of a single mother who cleaned offices at night and studied for her nursing degree during the day. Maya could still remember doing her homework at the kitchen table while her mother's textbooks lay open beside her, both of them working in the warm glow of the overhead light, both of them dreaming of something more. Her mother used to tell her that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take away, that education was armor and weapon both. Maya had carried those words with her through community college, through nights working double shifts at a diner to pay for her transfer to a state university, through countless moments when she'd felt like giving up. But she hadn't given up. She'd earned her degree in marketing with a minor in business analytics, graduated with honors, and sent out 243 job applications before Brightwell Technologies finally called her back. The salary was modest, the position was entry-level, but it was a foot in the door of a company that worked with some of the biggest brands in the country. Maya knew that if she worked hard enough, if she proved herself, she could build something real here. The problem was that proving herself seemed to require twice the effort for half the recognition. Her ideas in meetings were often overlooked until a senior colleague rephrased them 5 minutes later. Her reports were scrutinized with a level of detail that others never faced. And then there was Richard Caldwell, the company's biggest investor, and the man who held more power in Brightwell than anyone except the CEO himself. Richard had made his fortune in real estate during the boom years, then diversified into tech investments, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never having to worry about failure. He was 62 years old, silver-haired, always impeccably dressed in suits that cost more than Maya made in a month. He visited the office once a quarter for board meetings, and everyone from the CEO down seemed to walk on eggshells when he was around. Maya had observed this from a distance, grateful that her lowly position meant she'd never have to interact with him directly until the day everything changed. It started with a project that the marketing director, Susan Chen, had announced in a department-wide meeting. Brightwell had just signed a major client, a sustainable clothing brand called Green, Thread that wanted to completely overhaul their market presence. They needed a campaign that would appeal to young, socially conscious consumers while still maintaining broad appeal. It was the kind of account that could define careers, and Susan made it clear that she wanted ideas from everyone, regardless of seniority. Maya spent 3 weeks on her proposal. She worked evenings and weekends, diving deep into consumer behavior research, analyzing social media trends, studying the intersection of sustainability and fashion among different demographic groups. She'd grown up shopping at thrift stores not as a choice but as a necessity, and she understood in her bones the complex relationship people had with clothing, identity, and values. Her mother had taught her to see the dignity in second-hand things, to understand that worth wasn't about price tags but about story and purpose. She built her entire campaign around that insight, around the idea that sustainable fashion wasn't about sacrifice but about connection. Connection to the earth, to the people who made our clothes, to our own values. She called it Threads of Tomorrow, and she designed it to weave together storytelling, user-generated content, and strategic partnerships with micro-influencers who actually lived sustainable lifestyles, rather than just performing them for cameras. When she presented it to Susan and the senior marketing team, their response was enthusiastic. Susan called it fresh and authentic. The senior strategist said it had real potential. They decided to develop it further and present it to the client, alongside 2 other campaign concepts. Maya felt something she hadn't felt since starting at Brightwell, genuine hope that her work was being seen and valued. But then Richard Caldwell decided to get involved. He'd heard about the Green Thread account and wanted to sit in on the client presentation. It was unusual, Susan explained to the team, but Richard had connections in the sustainable fashion world and thought he might be helpful. The presentation was scheduled for Friday afternoon, and the entire marketing department spent the week in preparation mode, rehearsing presentations, polishing slides, running through possible questions. Maya arrived early that Friday, wearing her best blazer and the pearl earrings her mother had given her for graduation. She felt nervous but ready. She'd practiced her presentation dozens of times, and she knew her research was solid. The conference room was Brightwell's largest, with floor-to-ceiling, windows overlooking the city, and a massive table that could seat 30 people. The Green Thread executives arrived first, 3 of them, young and casually dressed in their own sustainable fashion line. They seemed friendly and genuinely excited to hear the proposals. Then Richard Caldwell walked in, and the energy in the room shifted. He greeted the clients with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any space, made small talk about mutual acquaintances, settled into the chair at the head of the table like a king assuming his throne. Maya noticed how Susan's shoulders tensed, how the senior strategist's smile became fixed and careful. The first 2 presentations went smoothly. Richard asked questions, offered suggestions, nodded thoughtfully. He was charming with the clients, deferential to their vision while subtly guiding the conversation. Maya began to relax slightly. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe he was just here to observe and support. Then it was her turn. She stood, advanced her first slide, and began to speak about Threads of Tomorrow. She explained the research, the insights, the strategy for building authentic connections with young consumers who craved meaning in their purchasing decisions. She showed mock-ups of social media content, outlined the influencer partnership approach, detailed the metrics they'd use to measure success. She could see the Green Thread executives leaning forward, engaged and interested. One of them was nodding along, smiling. She was halfway through, explaining the storytelling component when Richard interrupted. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cutting smoothly across her words. "Can you go back to that last slide?" Maya backed up, wondering if she'd moved too quickly, if he'd missed something important. Richard studied the screen for a long moment, then turned to look at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "This influencer strategy," he said. "You're proposing we work with what? A few dozen micro-influencers, instead of securing 1 or 2 major fashion influencers with real reach?" Maya kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir. The research shows that younger consumers, especially in the sustainability space, trust micro-influencers more. They see them as authentic, as real people rather than celebrities pushing products, and the engagement rates are actually higher per follower." Richard sat back in his chair, and that smirk appeared on his face. The one Maya would remember for the rest of her life. "The engagement rates," he repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of her data. He glanced at the Green Thread executives, then back at Maya. "How long have you worked in marketing?" "I've been with Brightwell for almost a year, sir. Before that, I studied consumer behavior and digital marketing strategy at..." "A year." He let the words hang in the air. "And you think that gives you the expertise to completely disregard conventional wisdom about influencer marketing? Susan, who put her on this pitch?" Susan started to respond, but Richard was already moving forward, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. "Here's what you need to understand about high-level marketing campaigns. It's not about what some algorithm tells you people will engage with. It's about power and reach. It's about getting your product in front of as many eyes as possible with the biggest names possible. That's how you build a brand. That's how you create market presence. You know nothing about this," He said it casually, almost kindly, as if he were simply stating an obvious fact. Then he laughed, a soft chuckle that suggested he found her presentation charmingly naive. Around the table, Maya could see the discomfort on people's faces. Susan looked mortified. The senior strategist was studying his notes. The Green Thread executives had gone quiet, watching, and Maya felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. Like a door she'd been holding closed for 11 months and 17 days suddenly swinging wide. She thought about her mother. Working night shifts and going to classes, never backing down, never accepting that she didn't belong in those nursing school classrooms. She thought about every time she'd been overlooked, every time she'd smiled and stayed quiet, every time she'd made herself smaller to fit into spaces that weren't designed for her. She looked directly at Richard Caldwell, and her voice when she spoke was calm and clear and absolutely steady. With respect, Mr. Caldwell, I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I can prove it. The room went completely silent. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. Excuse me? Maya advanced to a slide she'd prepared but hadn't planned to show unless asked. A detailed breakdown of 3 recent major fashion campaigns. Last year, the luxury brand Valance spent $2 million to have Madison Shaw, one of the biggest influencers in the world, promote their sustainable line. Beautiful campaign, millions of impressions, but their actual sales numbers from that demographic? Up only 3%, and most of that was their existing customer base. Return on investment was minimal because Madison's audience didn't trust her sudden interest in sustainability. They saw it as performative. She advanced to the next slide. Meanwhile, the brand EcoWear worked with 47 micro-influencers, people with 10 to 50,000 followers each, people who had built their entire platforms around sustainable living, spent 1/5 of the budget. Sales in the target demographic increased by 38%. Customer retention was 4 times higher. Why? Because those influencers had real credibility. Their audiences believed them. Richard was watching her now with complete focus, the smirk gone from his face. Maya kept going. I know this because I've spent the last 3 years studying exactly this intersection of consumer behavior, authenticity, and social media marketing. Not because an algorithm told me to, but because I've lived it. I've been the young consumer trying to make ethical choices on a limited budget. I've been the person scrolling through social media trying to figure out who to trust. I've done the research, analyzed the data from 34 similar campaigns over the past 5 years, and talked to actual consumers in the demographic we're trying to reach. She paused, then continued, her voice softer, but no less certain. And with respect, sir, I do know about high-level marketing. I know that the old playbook of buying the biggest name and hoping for the best doesn't work anymore. Not for this audience, not for this product. These consumers have been marketed to their entire lives. They're sophisticated. They're skeptical. They're looking for real connection, not just another celebrity telling them what to buy. And if we want to reach them, if we want to build something lasting with this brand, we need to meet them where they are with voices they actually trust. She stopped talking and the silence stretched out. Richard Caldwell was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then, slowly, he turned to the Green Thread executives. What do you think? The CEO of Green Thread, a woman named Sarah with gray streaks in her dark hair, spoke up. I think she's absolutely right. That's exactly the kind of authentic approach we've been looking for. The kind of understanding of our customers that we need. She looked at Maya. This is brilliant work. This is what we want. Richard turned back to Maya, and something had shifted in his eyes. How old are you? He asked. And this time there was no condescension in the question, just genuine curiosity. I'm 26, sir. He nodded slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. When I was 26, I thought I knew everything. I walked into rooms and assumed I was the smartest person there. And you know what? Sometimes I was, but more often I wasn't. I just had the confidence and the privilege to act like I was, and people believed me. He paused. I apologize. You clearly do know what you're talking about, and I shouldn't have dismissed you without hearing you out. Maya felt her heart hammering in her chest. Around the table, she could see the shock on people's faces. Richard Caldwell didn't apologize. Richard Caldwell didn't admit he was wrong, but he was doing both right now in front of everyone. Thank you, sir, Maya managed to say. "Finish your presentation," Richard said. "Please, I want to hear the rest." So she did. And this time everyone listened. Really listened? She outlined the full campaign, the timeline, the budget allocation, the success metrics. The Green Thread executives asked questions, engaged deeply, got excited about the possibilities. By the time she finished, they were already talking about implementation, about next steps, about how quickly they could get started. The meeting ended with handshakes and smiles and the Green Thread team choosing Threads of Tomorrow as their campaign. Susan pulled Maya aside afterward, her eyes bright. "That was incredible," she said. "I've never seen anyone stand up to Richard like that, and I've never seen him back down either." But the real surprise came 3 days later. Maya was at her desk, working on the campaign implementation plan, when she got a call from Susan asking her to come to her office. When she arrived, Susan gestured for her to sit down, and there was something careful in her expression. "I had a very interesting conversation with Richard Caldwell this morning," Susan said. "He wants to fund a new position, a senior strategist, role focused specifically on emerging consumer trends and authentic marketing. And he wants you to have it. Full creative control on your projects, significant salary increase, and a seat at the table for all major client pitches." Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "I don't understand. Why would he do that?" Susan smiled. "He said that you reminded him that the best ideas don't always come from the people with the most experience or the loudest voices. They come from the people who do the work, who understand the subject deeply, who have the courage to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. He said Brightwell needs more of that, and he's right." That night, Maya called her mother, and when she heard her voice, the tears finally came. She told her everything, about the presentation, about standing her ground, about the opportunity that had opened up. Her mother was quiet for a long moment, then she said, "Baby, I always knew you had that strength in you. You just needed the moment to show it. I'm so proud of you." 3 months later, Maya was leading the Threads of Tomorrow campaign launch, and it exceeded every projection. 6 months after that, she was presenting at a national marketing conference about authentic consumer engagement. A year later, she had built a team of 5 people, all of them focused on the kind of marketing that valued truth over flash, connection over reach, substance over spectacle. And Richard Caldwell became an unexpected mentor, not in the traditional sense, but in the way he'd check in on her projects, challenge her thinking, and most importantly, use his influence to make sure her voice was heard in rooms where it might otherwise have been dismissed. He told her once, over coffee in the break room, that she'd taught him something important that day in the conference room, that having power meant nothing if you weren't willing to admit when you were wrong, that the strongest leaders were the ones who could learn from anyone, regardless of age or position or background. Maya never forgot what it felt like to stand in that boardroom, her heart pounding, her voice steady, speaking truth in the face of dismissal. She never forgot the fear, but she also never forgot the freedom of refusing to make herself small. And as she grew in her career, as she hired and mentored younger employees, she made sure they knew that their ideas mattered, that their perspectives were valuable, that they didn't have to wait for permission to know what they knew. Because sometimes the most powerful act of kindness isn't a grand gesture. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let someone's potential be dismissed. Sometimes it's a wealthy investor checking his own privilege and ego long enough to really hear what a young employee is saying. Sometimes it's a company culture that shifts, slowly but surely, to value substance over seniority, insight over assumption. And sometimes it's a young woman from the south side of Chicago who learned from her mother that knowledge is armor and weapon both, choosing to stand her ground and speak her truth, and in doing so, changing not just her own trajectory, but opening doors for everyone who would come after her. The boardroom where it all happened is still there on the 4th floor of Brightwell Technologies. The glass walls, the long table, the windows overlooking the city. But now when young employees walk past it, they sometimes hear the story of what happened there. The story of Maya Washington and the moment she refused to be silenced. And they walk a little taller, speak a little bolder, knowing that their voices